Zara was used to being in control. Her people, the Zelvian, were warriors, strong, fast, and proud. They came from a planet where survival was a daily struggle and only the strongest thrived. But here on Earth, surrounded by humans, Zara felt something she hadn't expected: curiosity. She had come to Earth as part of an intergalactic peace mission. The Zelvian people were interested in forming alliances with Earth, but first, they needed to understand the humans better. And to do that, Zara had to spend time with the humans on their space station, learning their ways. But so far, she hadn't been impressed. Most humans she met were stiff, serious, and so awkward. She was beginning to wonder if this whole peace mission was going to be a waste of time. That was until she met him. Brandon was not like the others. He was the translator for the alien visitors, a job that usually required someone to be serious, focused, and professional. But Brandon, he was the opposite. He was the kind of guy who would laugh when things went wrong, the one who would make the most out of a bad situation. His messy brown hair always seemed to be in a state of disarray, and his eyes sparkled with mischief. And there was something about his smile, warm, inviting, like he could see the humor in even the most bizarre moments. "Zara, you ready for your tour of the station?" Brandon asked, his voice light and easy, as if it were no big deal that he was showing an alien warrior around. Zara raised an eyebrow. "I'm ready, but you're sure you can handle it? I don't want to bore you with my foreign ways." She gave him a playful smirk, testing him. Brandon chuckled, clearly not intimidated. "Bore me? I've been waiting for this. You've got aliens, spaceships, and advanced technology. I don't think I'll ever get bored." Zara felt a strange flutter in her chest. This was different. Most humans either stared at her with awe or treated her like some kind of foreign object. But Brandon, he wasn't intimidated by her alien strength or beauty. Instead, he seemed to see her as a person. That was something Zara hadn't experienced in a long time. As they walked through the station, Zara couldn't help but notice the way Brandon's energy filled the space around him. He made everything feel lighter, more interesting, even when he was just explaining how the station's gravity systems worked. He wasn't trying to impress her, he was just being himself. "Careful," Zara warned as they walked through one of the narrow corridors. "These halls aren't built for people like me." She ducked slightly, avoiding the low-hanging ceiling beams, while Brandon easily walked through without a problem. He glanced over his shoulder, grinning. "Yeah, I can tell. You Zelvians are a little too tall for this place." He stopped and looked up at her, his grin widening. "But hey, maybe you could just duck a little more. You know, for us short folks." Zara rolled her eyes, but she couldn't hide the small smile tugging at her lips. "You humans sure have a lot of funny ideas." "Hey, we make up for it with creativity," Brandon said with a wink. "Besides, I think I'm doing pretty well so far. What do you think?" Zara's eyes sparkled, but she kept her expression neutral. "I think you're surviving, I'll give you that." They continued on, the easy conversation flowing between them. For the first time since her arrival on Earth, Zara felt herself relaxing. It wasn't just the way Brandon made her laugh or the way his presence filled the air. It was the way he didn't seem to be afraid of her, the way he didn't hold back, the way he was so real. As they made their way through the station, Zara found herself drawn to him more and more. She wasn't sure why, but there was something about Brandon that made her feel different. And then, just as they approached the door to one of the observation decks, it happened. Brandon held the door open for her, his hand brushing against her back as she passed. It wasn't intentional, but it was impossible to ignore. For a brief moment, his hand lingered just a little too long, and Zara felt a warmth spread through her body, almost like an electric spark. She froze. Brandon, realizing what had just happened, instantly stepped back, his face turning crimson. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, that was totally accidental." Zara's eyes locked with his, and for a split second she was tempted to tease him, to make him squirm. But there was something in the way his face flushed, his words stumbling over themselves, that made her feel something unexpected, something warm and soft, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Instead of giving him the usual snarky response, Zara smiled. It wasn't the usual fierce grin she gave her enemies. It wasn't even the playful smirk she gave to friends. No, this was something else entirely. "It's okay, human," she said, her voice smooth, her tone light. "I liked it." Brandon blinked at her, looking more flustered than ever. "Wait, you liked it." Zara raised an eyebrow, a teasing gleam in her eyes. "You heard me." Brandon swallowed hard, trying to hide his embarrassment behind a nervous laugh. "Well, that's new. Definitely not something I expected from an alien warrior." Zara chuckled, stepping closer to him, her voice lowering just slightly. "You'll find that I'm full of surprises, human." Brandon could only stare at her, a mix of awe and confusion written across his face. And Zara, she felt that strange flutter in her chest again. This human, this funny, charming human, wasn't like the others. He didn't fear her. And in that moment she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to like him too. The days that followed were a blur of unexpected moments. Brandon had somehow become the one constant that Zara looked forward to seeing. She didn't quite understand it. Her mission was supposed to be about learning more about humans, not getting attached. But Brandon was different. He had a way of making the most mundane things feel fun. Even the simplest walk through the station felt like an adventure when he was around. Zara was used to being strong, being the one everyone looked up to, the one who didn't need help. But with Brandon, it was different. He made her laugh. He made her feel like she could let her guard down just a little. It wasn't long before Brandon suggested something that made Zara raise an eyebrow. "So how about a sparring match?" he asked one afternoon, his grin wide. "I've seen you work with the crew before. You're quick, strong. I bet I can teach you a thing or two." Zara's lips curled into a smile. "You want to spar with me? You know that's a terrible idea, right?" Brandon shrugged, his confidence unwavering. "Maybe, but I think I could teach you how to fight with style. You can't always rely on pure strength. You need finesse." His eyes twinkled as he added, "I mean, it might be fun to watch a human take down an alien, don't you think?" Zara laughed, a low, almost growling sound. She had never met someone who challenged her so easily, so fearlessly. "You're on, human. But I'll warn you now, your finesse will be no match for Zelvian strength." Brandon held up his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, if I can at least make it interesting, I'll consider it a win." The training room was quiet. The only sounds were their breathing and the occasional whir of the station's automated systems. Zara stood tall, her posture poised and powerful, while Brandon moved with a lightness that was almost unnatural for a human. He was quick on his feet, darting from one side to the other, always just out of reach. They began with the basics, jabs, blocks, and footwork. Zara was impressed by Brandon's agility, but she wasn't going to make it easy for him. She moved faster than any human could keep up with, easily dodging his every move. But Brandon kept grinning, clearly enjoying the challenge. "You know, you're a lot faster than I thought," he said, trying to catch his breath as Zara effortlessly parried his attacks. "I might actually have to work for this." Zara tilted her head, impressed. "You're not bad for a human, I'll give you that." Brandon winked. "Just wait, I'm not done yet." For the next several minutes, the fight became a dance. Zara would move in with lightning speed, but Brandon always found a way to avoid her blows. It was frustrating, but in a way that made Zara want to keep going. It wasn't just about winning. It was about the way Brandon refused to back down, no matter how many times she knocked him back. And then, just when she thought she had him cornered, something unexpected happened. Brandon made a move, a risky one, and managed to land a solid hit on Zara's side. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her pause for a second. "Gotcha," he said, breathing heavily but grinning from ear to ear. Zara stepped back, her eyes narrowing in surprise. She hadn't expected that. "You actually landed a hit," she said, impressed. I thought you said you were here to teach me style. Brandon laughed. Well, what can I say? I learned quickly. Zara couldn't help it. She laughed too, the sound deep and genuine. There was something about Brandon's carefree attitude that made her forget how serious everything usually was. In the midst of the sparring match, she realized just how much fun she was having. But as the match wore on, something else happened. Zara found herself less focused on the fight and more on the way Brandon moved. There was something oddly graceful about him, something that made him stand out in a way she hadn't expected. Maybe it was his resilience, or the way he smiled even when he was out of breath. But suddenly, all she could think about was him. All right, that's enough for today, Zara said, stepping back, her heart pounding. She could feel the adrenaline buzzing through her, but it wasn't just from the fight. Brandon, always the optimist, raised his arms in mock victory. Hey, I lasted longer than I thought I would. I'll take it. Zara shook her head, a playful grin on her face. You did well for a human, but I'll warn you, next time I won't go easy. Brandon's smile softened, his eyes meeting hers. I wouldn't have it any other way. For a moment they just stood there, the light from the station's windows casting long shadows across the floor. It wasn't like Zara to feel this way, but there was something about Brandon that made her want to be close to him. She wasn't sure if it was the adrenaline, the thrill of the fight, or something else entirely, but the pull between them was undeniable. Before she could think too much about it, Brandon broke the silence. You know, I've been thinking. Zara raised an eyebrow, thinking you. Brandon shrugged, still catching his breath. Yeah, I'm allowed to do it once in a while, but seriously, I was thinking about how much you've taught me, not just in the sparring match, but about yourself. You're strong, Zara, you don't need to hide it. Zara's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Brandon looked at her, his expression sincere. You've been pretending like it's just about strength, but I know you're more than that. I think you're scared to show the rest of you, and I just want you to know, it's okay. Zara's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said that to her before. She had always been the warrior, the fighter, the one who kept everyone at arm's length. But Brandon saw something else, something softer, something she had never allowed herself to be. She stared at him for a long moment, searching his eyes, wondering if she was ready to let him see that side of her. I'm not sure I can let you in, Brandon, she whispered. Brandon smiled gently, stepping closer. I'm not asking you to. I just want you to know I'm here when you're ready. And for the first time in a long while, Zara thought that maybe, just maybe, she could be ready. The peace that had settled over the station didn't last long. A few days after Zara and Brandon's sparring match, an emergency shook the space station. A sudden surge in the station's core systems sent alarms blaring through the halls, a sharp contrast to the calm they'd both enjoyed in recent days. Zara felt a cold knot of tension in her stomach as the flashing lights flooded the corridor, followed by the hurried footsteps of panicked crew members. What's going on? She asked, her voice commanding as she grabbed Brandon's arm. I don't know, Brandon said, his eyes wide with concern, but it's bad. Something's wrong with the gravity systems. Looks like the whole docking bay is about to collapse. Zara's heart skipped a beat. How much time do we have? Not long, Brandon shouted over the rising noise. The crew's trying to fix it, but... Before he could finish, the floor beneath them gave a violent shudder. The lights flickered, and then with a deafening crack the floor in front of them buckled, sending sparks flying into the air. The ground split open. Brandon, Zara cried, instinctively grabbing his wrist and pulling him toward the nearest escape route. He stumbled, nearly tripping over his feet. This way, we need to get to the emergency exits. Zara wasn't about to let him out of her sight. She'd already seen enough of the station to know that things were starting to fall apart, but there was no time to think about it. They had to move. As they sprinted through the darkened corridors, Zara could feel the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. The station was falling apart. There was no denying it. Every turn they took led them closer to the station's central core, toward the gravity chamber, where the worst of the damage was happening. "Stay close," Zara warned, her voice steady despite the panic swirling around them. "I'll get us out of here." Brandon nodded, but he was clearly shaken. "Zara, this is crazy. What if?" Zara grabbed his arm, pulling him into a nearby room just as another explosion shook the station, knocking them both off balance. "No what-ifs. We deal with what's happening now," she said, her eyes locked onto his. There was a fierceness there, a determination that she hoped would calm him down. She couldn't afford to lose him in all this. The room they had ducked into was a maintenance closet, the only safe place they could reach for a moment. The sounds of chaos echoed just outside, but it was quiet for now. Zara let go of Brandon's arm, looking around quickly. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice softer now, the adrenaline slowly starting to wear off. She noticed how pale he looked, how his hands were shaking. Brandon swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "I'm fine, just a little freaked out." "You're human," Zara said with a small, gentle smile. "It's normal to be freaked out." She stepped closer, her hand resting on his shoulder. "But you're not alone. I'll keep you safe." Brandon looked at her, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths. "You're incredible," he said, his voice quiet. "You're so calm in the middle of this. I can't even imagine how you're doing it." Zara met his gaze, her heart beating a little faster. "I'm just doing my job," she said, though her voice was softer now. "I've trained for moments like this." Brandon reached up and touched her arm, his fingers warm against her skin. "You're more than just a fighter, Zara," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "You're something else." Zara's breath caught. She'd heard these words before, but never with this kind of sincerity. She opened her mouth to respond, but just then, the sound of the alarms grew louder again. The station was on the verge of total collapse. "We need to move," Zara said, taking a deep breath. "Now." Brandon's hand lingered on her arm for a moment longer before he nodded. "Right behind you." Together, they emerged from the closet and sprinted down the hall, the floor buckling beneath them. The emergency lights were flickering, casting a strange red glow over the corridor. They could hear the distant sound of metal twisting and tearing, the station groaning under the stress of the damage. Zara could see the emergency exit up ahead, a small, dimly lit hatch that would lead them to a safe zone. But they weren't the only ones trying to escape. Panic had set in among the crew, and as they rounded the corner, Zara saw a group of terrified engineers trying to fix a control panel. The station's gravity was failing, and the artificial atmosphere was becoming unstable. "Zara, we can't just run anymore," Brandon shouted, his voice tight. "We need to help." Zara looked at him, her eyes fierce. "You stay here, I'll handle this." Before he could protest, Zara darted forward, pulling her strength together to push through the chaos. She grabbed one of the engineers by the arm and pulled him back to safety, blocking the control panel from falling as sparks flew. "I can't," the engineer began, his voice shaking. "You can't fix this by standing there," Zara snapped. "Get out of here and find shelter, now." The engineer hesitated, but then, realizing the danger, nodded and ran. Zara turned back to Brandon, who was still standing near the door, wide-eyed and unsure. "You should have stayed inside," she shouted as she reached him. "I'm not leaving you," Brandon said, his voice firm. "We're in this together." Zara looked at him, her chest tightening. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't. There was no time. She could feel the gravity system failing more with every passing second. "We're close," she said, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the hatch. "Come on." They made it to the emergency exit just as the station's gravity control began to collapse entirely. The floor under their feet gave way, but Zara grabbed onto a nearby support beam, pulling Brandon with her. For a moment it felt like they were weightless, suspended in the air as the station shook around them. But Zara held on, her grip strong, her heart pounding. And when the weightlessness finally passed and they were safely in the escape pod, She looked at Brandon, really looked at him for the first time in a while. "See," she said, her voice low, "told you I'd keep you safe." Brandon, still catching his breath, smiled. "I think you're my hero, Zara." Zara's smile softened, her heart swelling in her chest. "Maybe you're my hero too." As the escape pod blasted away from the collapsing station, the stars shining in the distance, Zara realized something. Something she hadn't been ready to admit before. Maybe this human was the one thing she wasn't willing to lose. The escape pod was a small, cramped space, but for some reason Zara felt a sense of calm. The emergency alarms had stopped, the shaking of the station was a distant memory, and the stars outside the small porthole offered a peaceful view. The worst was over. They were safe. Brandon sat across from Zara, his legs curled up to fit in the pod's tight quarters, trying to catch his breath. His face was flushed, his hair a mess from the chaos of the escape, but there was a grin on his lips, despite everything they had just been through. "You know," he said, his voice light, "I've never been this close to death before." Zara raised an eyebrow at him, her lips curving into a smile. "You sure know how to pick your moments, human." Brandon chuckled, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Well, at least I had a beautiful alien by my side." His tone was playful, but his eyes were sincere. Zara felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, a feeling she wasn't quite used to. It wasn't just the adrenaline anymore. There was something different between them now, something that felt like it had been building for days but hadn't quite fully surfaced until this moment. The danger had brought them closer, but it was something deeper that made her heart flutter now. She glanced over at him, her expression softening. "You're lucky I like you, human," she said, though there was no teasing in her voice this time. "You really think you're invincible, don't you?" Brandon leaned back, a relaxed smile tugging at his lips. "I mean, after surviving that whole disaster, yeah, I feel pretty good about myself." Zara shook her head, the corners of her mouth twitching into a smile. "I can't believe you, but I'm glad you're still here. I'd never forgive myself if something happened to you." Brandon's expression softened, and for a moment the playful banter between them was gone, replaced by something more real. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching hers. "You know, Zara, I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I'd get to know someone like you. Someone so strong but also kind." Zara's heart skipped a beat. She had heard compliments before. People had praised her strength, her resilience, her skills, but no one had ever spoken to her like Brandon did. He didn't just admire her for her strength. He admired her for the parts of her that she often tried to hide. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid to let him see those parts. "I'm not always kind," she replied quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've been through things I don't like to talk about. I've had to become who I am to survive." Brandon's eyes softened, his voice gentle as he spoke. "You don't have to explain yourself to me. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be you." The sincerity in his words made Zara's breath catch in her throat. She wasn't used to being this vulnerable, to having someone look at her like she wasn't just a weapon or a warrior or some untouchable force of nature. With Brandon, she felt like she could just be Zara, no masks, no walls. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the escape pod filled the silence, but it was a comfortable quiet. Zara could feel the weight of his gaze on her, could feel the tension between them growing, but she wasn't afraid of it anymore. She wasn't afraid of him either. Finally, Brandon broke the silence. "You know, I don't think I'll ever get used to being around someone like you." Zara tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. "Someone like me, an alien." Brandon smiled softly, leaning a little closer. "No, someone who makes me want to be better, someone who's brave and doesn't back down no matter how bad things get." Zara felt her heart thud in her chest. She had always thought of herself as someone who needed no one. But here, in this moment with Brandon, she realized that maybe she didn't want to be alone anymore. "Brandon," Zara's voice faltered, her throat tightening. I don't know what this is or where it's going, but I feel something too." Brandon's eyes softened, and before she knew it, he was reaching out, gently taking her hand in his. The touch was simple, but it sent a warmth coursing through her that she hadn't felt in years. She stared at their hands for a moment, unsure of what to do with the sudden surge of emotion she felt. "I don't know where this is going either," Brandon said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to see it through. Whatever happens, I don't want to lose this." Zara squeezed his hand, her heart swelling. She had always been the one to move forward alone, never relying on anyone. But with Brandon, things felt different. He didn't ask for her to change. He didn't ask her to be anything other than herself. The escape pod's small window showed the stars stretching out before them, endless and bright. It was a vast, beautiful universe, and yet in that moment Zara felt like she was exactly where she needed to be, with him. Brandon leaned in slightly, and without thinking, Zara did the same. The moment hung in the air between them, charged with the emotions they had both been holding back. It wasn't a rushed kiss or one fueled by the chaos of their escape. No, this was something slow, something sweet, and something real. Their lips met softly, a brief but meaningful touch, and it was as if the entire universe paused for just a moment. When they pulled away, it was as if everything had shifted. The danger, the chaos, the uncertainty, it all faded away in the warmth of their connection. "Whatever happens next," Brandon murmured, his forehead resting against hers, "I'm glad I'm with you." Zara smiled, her hand still resting in his. "Me too, human, me too." As the stars stretched on before them, they both knew that whatever was coming, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And for the first time in a long time, Zara felt like she didn't need to carry the weight of the world alone. The days after the chaos of the station's collapse were a blur of repairs, cleanup, and adjustments. The escape pod had taken them far away from the wreckage, but Zara couldn't shake the strange calm that had settled between her and Brandon. It wasn't just the relief of surviving, it was something else, something deeper, something that pulled at her chest every time she saw him. Brandon was always close by, his presence easy, familiar. There was no rush to push their bond forward, no pressure to define what was happening. Yet Zara felt a quiet anticipation in the air, something that lingered every time their eyes met, every time their fingers brushed. She wasn't used to this feeling. She was used to being the one in control, the one who didn't need anyone. But Brandon, he was different. He had a way of making her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. One evening, after a long day of repairs, they found themselves alone in the station's observation deck. The vast expanse of space stretched before them, glittering with stars and nebulae that painted the windows in beautiful shades of blue and violet. The silence between them was peaceful, the kind of quiet that made Zara's heart beat a little faster, even as she tried to ignore it. Brandon was leaning against the railing, looking out at the stars. The soft glow from the windows cast gentle shadows on his face. For a moment, Zara simply watched him, her thoughts running wild. There was so much she wanted to say, but she didn't know how to say it. How do you explain the way someone makes you feel without sounding completely vulnerable, especially when you've built your whole life on being untouchable? "Hey, Zara," Brandon said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. He turned to look at her, his expression warm and open. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, about what's next." Zara turned her gaze to him, her heart picking up speed. "What do you mean?" she asked, though she had a pretty good idea where this was going. Brandon pushed off from the railing and took a few steps closer to her. "I mean, this, us. I don't know what it is, but I feel like there's something between us, something real, something that it just doesn't feel like it should end when we get back to Earth." Zara's pulse quickened, but she didn't look away. She had to admit it, she'd been feeling it too. The connection, the pull, the way they seemed to understand each other without words. But could she really let herself go there? Could she really trust him? "Brandon," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I don't know what you expect from me, but I've never been someone who lets people in. I've always kept my distance. It's just who I am." Brandon's eyes softened, his expression never wavering. "I don't expect anything, I just want to be here, with you, for as long as you'll let me." His words hit her like a wave, and for a moment all she could do was stand there, staring at him. The honesty in his voice, the quiet sincerity that radiated from him, it was more than she was used to, more than she ever expected from anyone. She stepped closer to him, her breath catching. "I don't know what's happening to me, Brandon," she whispered, "but I'm scared of it, of letting someone in, of needing someone." Brandon didn't say anything at first, just reached out and gently took her hand in his. It was warm, steady, comforting. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand as he spoke. "You don't have to be scared," he said softly. "I'm not asking you to change. I'm just asking for a chance to see where this goes." Zara's heart raced in her chest, and in that moment she realized that she was done fighting it, done trying to keep the walls up. She had already let him in without even realizing it, and the thought of him walking away now, it felt like something she couldn't bear. Without thinking, she stepped closer and placed her hand on his chest, her fingers brushing against the warmth of his skin. Her heart was beating faster now, her body reacting to him in ways she couldn't deny. Brandon looked down at her, his gaze intense. There was no hesitation in his eyes, just a calm, quiet understanding. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to try. I want to see where this goes, with you." Brandon's smile was the sweetest thing she'd ever seen. He closed the distance between them slowly, his hand sliding around the back of her neck, drawing her in. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. And then, before Zara could say another word, his lips were on hers. It wasn't urgent or wild. It wasn't even the kind of kiss she expected after everything they'd been through. It was slow, gentle, like he was savoring the moment, letting it sink into both of them. Zara's mind went quiet as her body reacted instinctively, her hand sliding up to his neck, pulling him closer. For the first time, Zara allowed herself to feel everything that she had been holding back. The way his lips moved against hers, the way his touch made her feel safe, the way he made her forget that she had ever been afraid. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily, eyes wide as if they had just woken from a dream. Zara's heart was still racing, but now it wasn't from fear. It was from something else entirely, something new, something exciting, something she hadn't known she needed until this very moment. Brandon smiled, his eyes sparkling. "So I guess we're doing this now." Zara laughed softly, her hand still resting on his chest. "Yeah, I think we are." The stars outside the window seemed to glow a little brighter, as if the universe itself was smiling at them. For once, Zara didn't feel alone. She didn't feel like she had to be the warrior, the protector, the one who never needed anyone. With Brandon, she could be her, the real, vulnerable version of herself. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what might come next. Together, they would face whatever challenges the universe threw at them. But for now, in this quiet moment, Zara let herself enjoy what they had. The adventure was just beginning, and she was ready to embrace it, side by side with Brandon. The days aboard the ship drifted by in a blur of quiet moments and soft laughter. Zara and Brandon had fallen into a new rhythm. Their bond, still new and fresh, was as strong as ever. Yet the more they spent time together, the more Zara felt an unease she couldn't shake. The universe was a vast, unpredictable place, and Zara had spent her whole life preparing for the worst. But now, with Brandon, she was beginning to wonder if she had been preparing for the wrong things all along. One afternoon, as the ship glided through the stars, Zara found herself staring out of the observation window. The sight of endless space stretched before her, beautiful and serene, but it did nothing to ease the tension building in her chest. She felt a presence beside her before she even heard the soft footsteps. "Something on your mind?" Brandon's voice was soft, warm, and full of concern. Zara didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on the stars. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being able to handle anything that came her way. But now, with Brandon so close, the walls she had built over the years were starting to crack, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. "You're quiet," Brandon continued, taking a step closer. He didn't push her, just stood there, waiting for her to speak when she was ready. Finally, Zara sighed and turned toward him, her expression softer than usual. "I don't know what I'm doing, Brandon, I thought. I thought I could just stay focused on my mission, on what I came here to do. But now I'm distracted by you." Brandon frowned, his brow furrowing with concern. "Distracted? Zara, you're not just distracted. You're different, you're more alive." Zara shook her head. "No, I'm not. I've spent my whole life building walls. I've never let anyone in. And now you're here and I'm not sure I know how to do this. I've never allowed myself to feel like this before, to depend on someone else." Her voice trailed off, uncertain. Brandon took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "You don't have to do this alone, Zara. I want to be here, for you. You don't have to push me away." Zara felt a lump form in her throat. The sincerity in his voice was like a thread pulling at the very walls she had spent years constructing. She wanted to lean into him, to let him take all her fears away, but part of her still resisted. The warrior part of her, the part that was always prepared for the worst, always in control, wasn't sure she could allow herself to be so vulnerable. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, the words feeling heavy as they left her lips. "I've always had to be the one in control, the one who doesn't need anyone." Brandon's eyes softened, and without saying another word, he reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. His touch was warm, steady, and comforting. "You don't have to be anyone other than who you are with me, Zara," he said, his voice filled with gentle certainty. "You're allowed to need someone. You're allowed to let go. I won't run from that. I'll be here no matter what." Zara's heart clenched in her chest. It was so simple what he was saying, you're allowed to need someone, but for Zara it felt like the most revolutionary thing in the universe. She had always seen herself as a lone wolf, always prepared to face things on her own. But with Brandon, she saw something she hadn't expected. She saw safety. She saw trust. She saw someone who wouldn't judge her for her past. But her past was a weight she couldn't shake. The Zelvian people didn't show weakness. And in her culture, showing vulnerability was almost unheard of. She had fought too many battles, seen too much pain, to just throw herself into something as fragile as love. "I can't just forget who I am," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't let go of everything I've been taught." Brandon's hands moved from her face to her shoulders, his fingers gentle but strong. "Zara, you don't have to forget who you are. You can still be strong, still be the warrior you've always been. But you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to carry everything on your shoulders by yourself." Zara felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, but Brandon was already there, brushing his thumb across her skin. "Please don't," he said softly. "You don't have to hide from me, not anymore." Zara closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the storm of emotions crashing inside her. She wanted to trust him, wanted to let go of the fear that had held her back for so long. But it wasn't easy. She had built her life on control, on being the one who never let anyone too close. She took a deep breath, looking up at him through wet lashes. "I don't know how to let go," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But I want to try, for you, for us." Brandon smiled, his eyes filled with warmth and affection. "That's all I need, Zara. We'll figure this out together, one step at a time." Zara felt her heart begin to calm, the tension in her chest easing, but it was still there, a small weight that would take time to lift. Yet, for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she didn't have to carry it alone. With Brandon, maybe, just maybe, she could finally let go of the fear that had kept her locked away for so long. She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "One step at a time," she repeated softly. Brandon's grip tightened around hers, his thumb gently brushing her knuckles. "We've got this, Zara. We're in this together." And for the first time in a long time, Zara believed it. Days turned into weeks, and the ship continued its journey through the vastness of space. Zara and Brandon had settled into a quiet routine, but it wasn't an ordinary one. It was filled with moments of laughter, quiet conversations, and shared glances that spoke more than words ever could. Zara still had moments of uncertainty, still wrestled with the walls she had spent so long building, but every time she looked at Brandon, those walls seemed just a little less important. He had a way of looking at her, like she wasn't just a warrior or an alien, like she was Zara, human, vulnerable, and perfectly imperfect. It was one of those quiet moments that found them together in the ship's observation deck, just like so many times before. The stars stretched out before them, endless and beautiful. It was easy to get lost in the view, in the wonder of it all, but this time, it wasn't the stars that captured Zara's attention. It was Brandon. He was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the endless expanse of space. But Zara wasn't focused on the stars. She was focused on the man beside her, the human who had somehow turned her world upside down. She leaned against the railing beside him, her presence soft but steady. "You know," she said, her voice casual but filled with meaning, "I never thought I'd end up here like this. I thought I'd be alone forever, always running, always fighting." Brandon turned his head to look at her, his eyes soft but filled with curiosity. "And now?" "Now," Zara hesitated, searching for the right words. "Now, I think I've been wrong all this time. I thought strength meant never depending on anyone, but being with you, Brandon, it's made me realize that there's strength in letting someone else in." Brandon smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting in that way that always made Zara's heart skip a beat. "I'm glad you've realized that. You don't have to be alone, Zara. You've got me." Zara's heart fluttered and she reached for his hand. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to make her feel grounded in a way she hadn't felt before. "You're not going anywhere, are you?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Brandon gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, his thumb gently brushing against her skin. "Not unless you push me away," he said, his voice light but sincere. She smiled, a playful glint in her eyes. "You're not getting rid of me that easily." "Good," he said, stepping a little closer to her, "because I'm not letting you go either." Zara felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had fought so long, so hard to protect herself from this very feeling, needing someone. But now, with Brandon, it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. He wasn't just her anchor in the storm of space. He was her home. There was something else too, something deeper. The more time they spent together, the more Zara began to realize how much she had come to care for him. It wasn't just the way he made her laugh or the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the universe. It was the way he made her feel, like she could be vulnerable, like she could share her fears, her hopes, without judgment. Zara cleared her throat, her voice suddenly quiet. "I know I've been distant, but I want you to know something. I want you to know that I care about you, more than I've ever cared about anyone." Brandon's eyes softened, and he took another step closer, his breath warm against her skin. "I already know, Zara. I can feel it." The moment stretched out between them, charged with unspoken words and shared feelings. They stood there, hand in hand, the quiet hum of the ship and the distant stars their only company. But for Zara, this moment was everything. She had spent so many years hiding, running, afraid of letting anyone close. But with Brandon, everything felt different. She wasn't afraid anymore. "I've never been good at this," Zara said, her voice breaking the silence. "Being open, being real." Brandon chuckled softly, his thumb brushing across the back of her hand. "You don't have to be perfect, Zara. You're already more real than anyone I've ever met." Zara felt her chest tighten with emotion. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her with that kind of sincerity, that kind of understanding. She smiled, her heart swelling in her chest. Maybe I don't need to be perfect anymore. Brandon leaned in, his lips barely brushing hers in the softest kiss. It was brief, but it was everything she needed. When they pulled back, he looked at her, his expression filled with a quiet intensity. "We've got this, Zara," he said, his voice low but filled with certainty. "Together." And in that moment, Zara realized something else. The universe was still vast, still unpredictable, but it didn't seem so overwhelming anymore, because she had Brandon by her side. They weren't just two people from different worlds anymore. They were something more. They were a team, a partnership, something that could stand against anything the universe could throw at them. The stars outside seemed brighter now, their light shining down on them like a promise. A promise of adventure, of challenges, but most of all, a promise of a future. Zara's heart filled with hope as she looked at Brandon, her hand still wrapped around his. No matter what came next, she knew they would face it together, and that was enough to make her believe that anything was possible. The future, unwritten and unknown, was waiting, and for the first time, Zara was excited to write it with him.